It was in a quiet, secluded neighborhood of the city. My new home was directly across from an old, abandoned house that had been uninhabited for many years. At first glance, there was a sense of dark mystery about it, as if it harbored grim secrets and terrifying tales. My gaze couldn't help but be drawn to one of the windows of this house. The darkened glass gave it an even more menacing appearance, as if it held something unclean and ominous within. But what was most unsettling was the fact that despite its abandoned appearance, I sometimes saw an old man coming out of it. He was tall and gaunt, with a face that seemed to stretch into long shadows. But most peculiar of all was the absence of eyes. Instead, there were only two deep hollows in his face, like doorways into oblivion. It was strange to see him with eyes that seemed to pay no attention to the surroundings. Every time I passed by his house, it felt like he was watching me. But of course, that was absurd. How could a man without eyes see? Still, the shadow that enveloped him made me feel uneasy. My friends joked about it, saying it was just my overactive imagination. But one night, when I returned home late, I heard strange noises coming from the neighbor's house. At first, it was just a faint scraping sound piercing through the darkness of the night. Then I heard moans, muffled and indistinct, yet echoing in the very core of my consciousness. My heart began to beat faster. I stood in front of my house, frozen in place, as if trying to discern what was happening in the dark house across the street. But silence returned, as if the sounds had been nothing but figments of my tired mind. I entered my house, trying to forget what I had just heard. But when I closed my eyes, the sounds returned to my consciousness. The moans grew louder and clearer, as if someone was pounding inside my head, demanding to be heard. The night passed slowly, but I couldn't fall asleep. I was still reeling from what had happened in that house, lying on my bed, listening to the sounds of the night. And then I heard a scream. It pierced the silence of the night like a ghost demanding release. There was something in that scream that made me tremble with fear. I knew it couldn't be just a random scream. It was something more sinister. My thoughts were muddled, and I couldn't understand what to do. I could call the police, but what could I say? My neighbor is screaming in his house. However, when morning came, I decided not to leave it as it was. I approached my neighbor's door and knocked. My knock sounded louder than I expected, and I felt foolish, but no one answered. Instead, I heard another scream, interrupted by sounds of struggle. I felt my heart stop. I realized I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. Fear gripped me, but determination pushed me to action. I gathered my thoughts and made the decision to enter that dark, grim house. The door opened slowly, creaking on its old hinges. Ahead of me lay dark corridors, like traps for those who dared to enter them. I moved forward slowly, nervously scanning every corner. Suddenly, I heard another scream, this time much louder and more distinct. My fear intensified, but I pressed on, tension filling every fiber of my being. As I delved deeper into the house, it became increasingly clear that the screams and moans were emanating from one of the rooms. My legs felt heavy as I approached that door. It was slightly ajar, as if waiting for my arrival. I took a deep breath and entered the room. My eyes immediately found the source of the screams. A man lay on the floor, his dead eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. There was a deep wound in his neck, as if someone cruel and relentless had drained the life from his body. I recoiled in horror, my legs carrying me away from this nightmare. But something made me stop. I heard a whisper, faint and barely discernible. It came from a dark corner of the room. My fear overwhelmed me, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached the dark corner and heard the whisper even louder. My heart pounded wildly as I leaned in to see what was hiding there. And then I saw him, the old man without eyes. He stood in the darkness, like a part of the shadows, his face contorted with fear and pain. His hands were covered in blood, and a terrible grin was frozen on his lips. "He went too far," he whispered, his voice hoarse and menacing. He couldn't stop himself. He deserved this. My body filled with horror. I stepped back, but his voice haunted me like the ghost of my own nightmare. I rushed out of that house, trying to banish the gruesome image from my mind. Since then, I never saw that man again. The police came and took his body, but they never found any evidence or witnesses to what happened. But I knew the truth. I saw him, I saw his merciless face and his eyes buried in darkness. He was a maniac, a killer, a monster lurking in the shadows. And now his shadow will always haunt me, reminding me that horrors can lurk in the most unexpected places.